we're thinking, and we're live. Hey, everybody! Welcome to another episode of the Military Writers Academy, where we talk to military and military interested writers about some of the best practices and worst practices that we've observed as writers and editors in the business. My name is Daniel Pace. I'm a retired Special Forces guy and a full-time aspiring author now. I don't know if you could be a full-time aspiring author, but yeah, full-time aspiring author now. And with me today, instead of Randy, is Miss Laura Graves. Laura, how are you doing today?
I'm pretty good. I mean, not as good as Randy since he's on vacation right now, and I'm filling in for him, but pretty good.
It was would that we could all be on vacation, but yeah, tragically also not on vacation. But you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I work with Randy. I am his business partner, not to be confused with his romantic partner, which happens an awkward number of times. Like, he lives in Spain and I live in Texas. But we've been working together for like 5 years now. We do ghostwriting, book coaching, developmental editing. We do a lot of military memoirs, a lot of like action thriller fiction, that sort of thing.
That's awesome. Y'all obviously worked with me on my last memoir, which was super helpful because again, I very much appreciate your feedback in particular because you have no military background whatsoever, and so it can be easy to fall into the trap of talking across things or of wandering off into jargon land, and it's absolutely critical as a writer at any time to get that feedback from somebody that doesn't share your point of view, so that you can see how other people are going to interpret what you say, which is awesome.
Yeah, I feel like that is our most consistent point of like positive feedback from our military fiction and nonfiction authors is getting one round of editing from two people, one of whom spent 32 years in the Army and the other one is not spent no time in any military branches at all. And so, you get a lot of feedback on whether or not things are technically accurate, whether or not terms are being used correctly. It's all being, accurately represented by Randy. And then for me, you get the, like, I have no idea what you're talking about, and I'm going to need you to dumb this down if you want to speak to somebody who hasn't been in the military.
Again, that point of view is priceless because we talk a lot on the show about, target audience and, hey, who are you really trying to talk to? Like, who is your reader? But the reality is you do have to write broadly enough that it's interpretable by more than just this super niche person. Like, I write mostly to veterans, but at the same time, even veterans come back often and are like, well, I don't understand what you mean, because, they're a veteran 30 years ago and the terminology's changed. 30, actually, I was a veteran almost 30 years ago. So let's say 50, 60 more years ago than that. How sad that is. But it's the same kind of idea. You're like, well, you're not really specific over here that I know what you mean. And that's awesome. Well, so obviously Randy's on vacation, good on him. But usually we open up with, a little bit of talk about the projects we're working on now. So what are you project working on? Like, obviously you're edited with Randy. I know you got a lot going on there. You want to talk about that? You want to talk about something personally you're working on in the writing world?
Unlike Randy, who is a wild overachiever and has no children at home, I am basically never working on a personal writing project. I am a theoretical aspiring author, but I would never call myself that because I have not finished anything ever that was not for a client. Now, we've ghostwritten several books, but for
that counts.
Personally, never. Yeah. It does count. It paid. So that's nice. But we're actually just starting a new military memoir, actually, by a veteran who was the first person so he is an amputee. He lost his leg in a helicopter accident. And after, getting a prosthetic and doing physical therapy and all of that, he actually returned to flight status.
That's awesome. So now he flies with one leg, or is he retired now?
He's retired at this point, but he did fly with one leg in the military. Yeah.
That's amazing. I guess, I don't know if planes have like a clutch and a gas pedal. So I guess I don't know. I mean,
I don't know. I have no idea how to fly a plane. So we just started it. I just, the only part of it that I've read so far is the actual helicopter crash. He spent a lot of time in South America, and it was an Ecuadorian helicopter pilot who crashed into the ocean, and he was a passenger, not the pilot, and lost his leg.
That's got to be sad. Like, when you're a pilot, you know how it is. I mean, if you're a professional, whatever, and you're watching and kind of stuck with somebody else doing something, it's got to be super stressful. You're like, what are you doing, guy? I mean, you're in the back as the pilot, wondering why you're crashing into the ocean. I would imagine that's a wonderful experience. Is this post one leg or pre one leg? Is this how he lost his leg?
That's how he lost his leg. Yeah, that's the incident where he lost
Okay.
his leg. Yeah.
It wasn't like a shark or anything, was it? I mean, this seems like you go like pretty
No,
horrible ways to
no,
lose
it
your
was
leg in the
just
ocean.
the impact. His leg was so mangled. It didn't actually get like ripped off. It was amputated because it was
Gotcha.
so destroyed in the wreck.
That sounds amazing. I'm glad to have never had that experience, but it does sound
Right.
like an interesting. I mean, as a ghostwriter, you got to like wander into these stories all the time, where you just hear about these just crazy, wild, over the top, like holy hell, that's
Mhm.
real, and then you have to capture it. You have to figure out a way to tell the story, like extract
Mhm.
it from the person and put it on paper. I imagine that's I imagine that's challenging.
It is, but it's good, and I enjoy. And this one actually is. We're not ghostwriting. We're just doing a developmental edit for.
Mm.
So his daughter is. She writes like radio plays, and so
Okay.
she wrote the book. And then, which is nice because she was able to do all of the hardest part of ghostwriting a memoir is doing all of the interviews and trying to extract all of the information from all of the people in a timely fashion. Um,
I
and
believe it.
she has spent the last 10 years doing all of the interviews with all of the people and extracting all of the information and kind of compiling it. So makes it much
No, that's
easier.
awesome. And I can imagine that's difficult. I mean, like from memoir point of view, most of it you're writing out of memory. Like I always write first person in memoirs, and so you're just writing about what you remember, and then you have a source check. But the interviews are usually like, "Hey, here is a basic story. Please fact check this for me and see if you remember it differently." But gosh,
Mhm.
as a ghostwriter, it would be very challenging to walk up to the person who had the first person experience and say, "Hey, did I get this right?" Like, I mean, it's got
Mhm.
to be pretty hard to get kind of the nuance right there. It
Yeah.
must take a lot of interviews. You just talk to people.
It does. It does. And it can be very difficult when, you know, people are resistant to kind of digging into the things that are going to be the part that's going to make it a story, right? Like the parts that are going to be really interesting. I know you had this struggle working on your memoir, with talking to your wife about things, and she was like, "I don't want to go back there. Like, I am glad that that's in the
Yeah.
past. Let's not revisit that conversation." And
It,
that's a very common
yes.
thing.
No, I believe you. It's like with fiction. Randy and I talk about this a lot. The old like, well, with fiction, you can just create or delete in order to make the story flow the way you want and to achieve the message you
Mhm.
want. With nonfiction, you can also do that, but you have to choose from a narrower pool of available options, right? You could delete pretty much anything, but you can only include so much unless you want to just straight up make stuff up, which I think most nonfiction authors try not to do.
Right.
Um, so yeah, and then you have all the sensitive realities. Like nobody's going to offend Tyrion the dwarf, right? HP or H.R.R. Martin or George R.R. Martin doesn't have to worry about his characters being offended, right? He can write whatever he wants, and then when he kills them, they're fine. But in nonfiction, a little trickier.
Right. Yes, that
Um,
is definitely. In fact, we do legacy memoirs that are not really written for a broader audience. They're written for friends and family to just kind of preserve history. And we did one of those not too long ago, where that's one of the big things we look at, right? Is like, how are people portrayed in this book, and how are they likely to respond to that? And like, did you potentially portray somebody or a relationship in a way that maybe that's not how you meant that, to come across?
yes, I can imagine that is especially for publication, but even if it's just for distro and family wide, yeah, I can imagine that's super fiddly, like around the edges. So I'm just finishing a memoir. So like our current projects, right? I'm just finishing another memoir on the kind of prequel to what we wrote last time, and it's all about being a private in Afghanistan. And you bump into a lot of this, so you want to capture the story accurately, which means you're capturing kind of boneheaded stuff. That
Mhm.
people do and that you do, but I try to reach out to all those people. Anybody that has anything vaguely negative about them, or either like, okay, we're either going to change the name if it's somebody that I have no relationship with, or I'll reach out to the person and say, hey, are you good with me capturing this aspect of your personality? Weirdly, 100% of them have said yes so far. So I've had nobody that I reached out to that had kind of a character that was a little skitsed out or a character that made some bonehead decisions. They've all been like, no, put it in there, man. That's great. It's fine. It was a long time ago. But I could see how people would be really sensitive about it, especially if you got into some like personally very questionable sorts of activities that maybe those skeletons just need to stay in the closet. That's
Yeah.
challenging.
Well, and I think a lot of it can be, you know, like you mentioned, events that people maybe don't want documented in that way. But
Yeah.
there's also the kind of the tone and the portrayal. This was was a big thing in Operation Pineapple Express. There were a couple of characters who, you like, when I went through it for the last kind of run through before it went out, was like, hey, this person, the way this person is being framed in the book, the way this person is coming across, is that how we want that out there? And, you know, then everyone having a revelation of like, oh, I didn't realize that that's how that person came across. Let's maybe reframe this and let's fix this. And, you know, you mentioned, obviously we don't want to lie in nonfiction, but there are certain aspects that you can delete or kind of mute so that it's not coming across in a way you don't want to, you know?
100%. Yeah. And once it's in print, that's it, right? There's no take backs. And once it's out there and you've sold, you know, X thousand copies, you can't untell the story. Yeah, particularly with people that I haven't been able to get a hold of, I've been super hesitant to put anything down about a person that even might, you know, throw any kind of shadow onto their character, because it's better just not to tell that part of the story. Usually I think you can achieve the same end from a storytelling point of view by either doing it yourself. I'm all about throwing myself under the bus because that's probably the easiest way to do it, or doing it with somebody that just doesn't care or that is happy to do that. But it's dangerous, a little high risk, a little nerve wracking, right? When you actually throw it out there, you're like, hopefully nobody's pissed about this.
Right. Because they're real people, you know, and they're
real people.
It's unfortunate when you know, make your spouse look like a harpy, or you know, make it seem like, oh, I didn't really want that kid, you know, they're like, oh, okay. Might want to.
Yes. Well, on that particular note, I'm definitely have my wife read everything many times because, you know, that's really close to home and you definitely don't want anybody to misconstrue anything there. But as you branch a little further out, it gets a little less high risk. But yeah, 100%. Nobody wants that message to get mixed because they won't unsee it. But no, it's funny because we're really talking about character development. Like, it's everything we talked about is what we were going to talk about during the show anyway. And so what we wanted to cover today for the audience or the folks who are looking at this later is we want to talk character development. We want to talk, you know, as an author and editor, what do you have to do? Like, where's the sweet spot between too many characters, too few characters? How do you get a character kind of represented the way that you want this character represented in the story? Do you use POV? Do you just describe the person? How much description is too much? I wanted to cover some of that today because I think character development is something people struggle with, right? It could be easy to throw too many characters into a book and have them just kind of fall flat or confuse the reader. But conversely, I mean, you do need them to kind of tell the story, because if you try and do it with too few characters, it's not really engaging or realistic. So I figured, let's just talk about, like, why is that important? Like, why does character development matter? Like, why is this even a topic that you think we would cover?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there are two main areas where I see people in fiction writing, right, which is what we're talking about today, kind of air categories they fall into. One of them, especially with anything unusual like science fiction, fantasy, or like kind of paranormal, which would technically be fantasy, but people don't like that label if it's, you know, like a Stephen King novel where there's something supernatural going on, but it's not
dragons.
Fantasy.
Can't be fantasy. No dragons.
Right. Yeah, but they fall really in love with their world building and their premise, but it doesn't serve a purpose. And then the flip side is that you have people falling in love with certain characters who don't necessarily serve a purpose. And it really all comes back to for characters, it comes back to your protagonist, right? So the protagonist is the avatar for the reader in the book. This is the person that's going to take me through the plot of the story and let me experience it. And that person has to go through a character arc. And, you know, whether you're going to have a growth arc or a fall arc or a flat arc, you still have to have some kind of arc, because that's the journey that I'm going on as a reader, right? Story should be entertaining. It is entertaining, but that's not its primary function. You know, humans developed story as a technology to learn vicariously. We're the only creature on the planet that tells stories and that can learn not from doing, but from being told about other people's experiences. And I love about some of the research that they've done that shows that people's brains, like in brain scans, your brain lights up the same way learning from story as it does learning from doing. And that's why we have managed, why other creatures are still living the same way that they've lived for all of creation. Humans have gone from cave dwellers to outer space, because we don't have to relearn everything every generation. And that's what your character has to do for the reader, is you have to know, as the author, what am I teaching my reader about the human experience and about real life, right? Because there's usually a combination of practical skills and something deeper about the human experience that you're going to be teaching and taking your reader on this journey. And that's the protagonist's job. And then every other character in the book has to be a piece of that. So if you have a protagonist, growth arc is the most common character arc that you see in genre fiction, particularly. So if your protagonist is going from their lie, their incorrect belief about the world, that they're going to learn the truth about throughout the story, you have an antagonist, right? And the antagonist believes the same lie as the protagonist. It can't be it can be something totally different. It has to be the same, but like a darker, more intense version of that lie. Then you have supporting characters who will break out outlining sessions. That's one of the blocks that I have people fill out for their fiction outlines, is listing all of the characters that are going to be in a story, all named characters that are going to be in the story, and how those characters reflect a facet of the character arc, of the protagonist's character arc. Because if they don't do that, they're just fluff. They're just there because you like them.
No, that makes perfect sense, right? I like pieces, or I guess stimulates the same pieces of your brain that doing does, but I can kind of see the truth of it as I think about like how, one, as a parent, how I engage with my kids, but two, even just like the oldest story, like all the way back to the Bible, right? Like Jesus uses parable. Why? Because I don't know, because people are engaged with narrative storytelling in a way that they are not by just straight up stereo instructions, exposition. Like, here are the things you should do. 1, 2, 3. I mean, my kids' eyes glaze over pretty quickly for the first 750 times I tell them anything like that. And maybe like the 800th they get it, but it does take a long time. But the story really does kind of pull people into it. And so maybe that's, but obviously, to your point, the characters aren't engaging if you can't make the story kind of flow. And I guess there's a lot of tropes that make stories flow for that reason. Like, there's a reason people like these arcs. There's a reason that these arcs kind of exist. So, but if you can't do that, then you just end up with this noise, right? Nobody's going to kind of buy into it at all. No, that's fascinating. I never thought of it that way at all. But so where's the challenge then? Let me ask you this. And I know we're talking fiction, but we got to talk a little. I mean, nonfiction. You bring questions to mind as we talk about it. Mm-hmm. One of the challenges that I have with nonfiction is that sometimes I kind of have to name a person because a person happened to be there, but they don't really have a huge piece of the story. Like, it's almost like you've got to give them a shout out because they were there, and it would be kind of rude not to, or because, I mean, I don't know. So that balance must be tricky. But in the fiction world, it's very simple, right? If you bring in a character, if you're bringing in Sam Gamgee, then the reason you're bringing him in is because you want to talk about how you got this solid, rock solid guy that's going to help you out. And then you got Merry and Pippin, the two clowns who eventually grow up, but they've got to be the idiots up front. And so I guess you bring them on for a purpose. Like, there's no extra characters in good fiction. Is that kind of true statement?
Yes. In well-written fiction, there are no extra characters. And I will say, I will caveat, because you mentioned Merry and Pippin, right? Who basically serve the same plot function, but right. their interaction is entertaining, right? And so that is a thing that you can do, and that's a thing I've seen done well multiple times, where there's a duo, but they serve the same function in the plot. And actually, this is super duper common. I know you have kids. If you ever read like the little chapter books they read, like Magic Tree House, those like little books that they start reading in like second grade. In those books, typically there are 2 or 3 protagonists in the book, and they all function as one character. Like, if you analyze the story, it functions as a single protagonist. So there are times where you might split people out so that you can externalize things. Like, again, in the chapter books, For little kids, you have 2 or 3 protagonists so that they can externalize the stakes and the crisis as they're trying in each scene, as they're kind of working through what decision to make, and they're processing information. They can do that in the form of dialogue with each other, because kids aren't going to pick up the stuff. Like if you don't put it right there on the surface, there's no subtext in little kids' books. They're not picking that up.
No. No, that makes perfect sense, right? So it's almost like different facets of the same protagonist. Like I picture the old Encyclopedia Brown and Sally. Like they're different characters, but in the sense they're really solving the mystery the same way, and they're just bouncing different problems off each other. And so if they didn't exist, it would all have to be either like just narrative in the guy's head while he's talking, which to your point doesn't resonate super well with little kids, but also it could often sound kind of schizophrenic and weird, like some kind of Chuck Palahniuk book where you're like, why is this person having such deep conflicted conversations? And kids aren't going to pick that up. Right. So yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. So yeah, so I guess so then you add in or subtract characters from your story as necessary to kind of bring that stuff to life. So what's the sweet spot there? Because I mean, you see books, I mean, obviously you don't want to do that with every single facet of the person's character as he develops. So how do you kind of gauge when you're bringing in another character versus, okay, well, I really should have another character do this? And when is too many facets? Does that mean the secondaries all need to be kind of flat? Does that make sense? Like if they're each representing this facet, should they be relatively less developed, or is there, what's your best practice there?
Yeah, I mean, your secondary characters are typically going to be less dynamic than your protagonist, right? Because your protagonist is the one who's going to be holding all of the conflicting pieces together until they get resolved at the end. Not to say that there can't be any conflict in secondary characters, but there can be a tendency to try to overdevelop secondary characters. And if you've ever read a book or watched a movie where you liked a supporting character better than the main character, that's what happened there, right? And
you get spinoffs, right? That's where you get spinoffs.
That is where you get spinoffs, but also it weakens the primary story, right? Because the protagonist doesn't care about what they're supposed to care about, and that's your job as the author, is to make the reader care about the right thing. So if we don't care about the protagonist because I like this other person better because they're more dynamic and more interesting, like this is a problem that you need to fix.
That kind of hurts though, right? Because I mean, we all read through books where you're like, well, I mean, it's a really great book, but I don't like the protagonist. Like Frodo is not my favorite character in the Lord of the Rings, for example. Harry Potter might be my favorite character in that series. I mean, I'm just thinking of, classics that you can kind of bring to life. Game of Thrones, I don't know who the hell to pick, but it's a different sort of book.
That's a whole different game.
So that, no pun intended, but let's look at that though, because that's a different model, and that gets into kind of POVs. So I think primarily what we're talking about up front is mostly a single POV book, right? You're talking about, again, the character arc, one person. You might have a couple of different POVs, but primarily you're looking at it from one character's point of view. Mm-hmm. Why would you change that? Why would you start bringing in this whole cast of characters to kind of add complexity to the book? I mean, I feel like you really risk complication there.
You do. And so my very, very strong and consistent advice is, if you are a new author, write a single POV. I've had multiple people push back and do, well, George R.R. Martin. And my response every single time is, you are not George R.R. Martin. You're not. Sorry. Right. I'm sorry. Right. But name something else that's on the same level of Game of Thrones as far as complexity and world, all of the things. There's so much going on there. And to your point that you made earlier, who is the main character of Game of Thrones? Exactly. Right. Yeah. And yet everyone's so invested in all of the things. Mm-hmm. You're not George R. Martin.
Good on him, right? But it could easily have fallen flat. And honestly, we talked this a couple weeks ago, but the first time I picked it up, I put it back down before I got into it, because it hops around so quickly from chapter to chapter that I'm like, I don't even know what just happened. Where did we go? What do we care? It was like, all right, I'm going to try this again. Everybody says it's really great. And you start getting into it, and then you start following it, and it kind of gets into your brain. But it's a hard one at first to just pick up the cast, mm-hmm. put them on your brain, and then just follow them. Because again, every chapter is a hard jump, and that mm-hmm. is pretty disorienting. That creates risk from an author's point of view that you're going to totally shed your reader.
And it's very, the reader is looking for, who am I supposed to care about here? That's another risk of POVs, right? That every time you give someone a POV, you're telling the reader, this person is important and you're supposed to care about this person. And so we're looking right from the beginning, who am I supposed to latch onto? Who matters here? And the more people, the more POVs you introduce, the more confused your reader gets. And in most cases, the more your reader kind of checks out and dissociates and just cares about fewer and fewer people. And if you think about like how many close relationships can people really have in real life, you might have a zillion friends, but how many people are you really, really close to that you would be completely authentic with and no filter, like this is the real me, 100%, it's a small number of people. And that's the same thing in a book, like how many people can you really invest in a book? You only have so much you can give to the characters as a reader. And so every time you add somebody, you're cutting it, right? You're diluting the reader's investment. And in certain cases, like George R.R. Martin, the unicorn, you can get people super invested in a lot of people. But even then, I feel like everybody who read Game of Thrones or who watched the series, it would get to certain parts where you're like, okay, when is this part going to be over so I can get back to the people I care about?
Sure. The Lord of the Rings is my favorite example of that, where you're like, you hop from hard story to hard story. And I think most people find the slog through Mordor to be a little dull when you're like, all right, could we stop reading about how tired you are and how long this walk is? But he kind of feels like he has to. But again, we're not George R.R. Tolkien either. And so my reader might not stick around for that whole story because I haven't written the kind of epic that draws them into it. But yeah. Well, Martin also prunes his characters a lot, right? I can uninvest because, well, you killed Ned Stark. Okay, I thought he was pretty awesome, and I wish he'd stick around, and maybe he'll come back. But mostly, my brain just dumps him. Like, there's no more. There's only so many characters that stay alive long enough. But man,
my brain's need to identify a protagonist had decided Ned Stark was the protagonist of the book, which was excellent because I was certain he wasn't going to die at the end because he's the protagonist. You can't kill the protagonist in book one, obviously.
Yep.
And then he died. I was like, what just happened? I didn't see that coming. Is he not the main character? And that was the moment I realized, oh my gosh, there is no main character. It's just a free-for-all.
Maybe Tyrion, maybe, but to your point, like as an author, he was good enough at playing up tropes and kind of standardized plots that you just assumed, like, okay, here comes the magic wand that's going to make all this better. And you're like, oh, we're doing it a different way. And that's super challenging. Actually, there's a little bit a similar, like on way older scale with Dune. Like I'm a big Dune fan. I kind of lose focus as you go through the series, particularly by like 6 and 7. Good Lord. But with 1, you only see a couple of extra POVs. You see a very small number, like the mom and the dad. I think the Duke and Jessica get POV scenes, but those kind of engage you with a character that otherwise, like you feel like the Duke's going to get killed, right? That's kind of, they set that up pretty early that like he's going to die. But when you POV him, you're like, oh well. Maybe he's going to kind of make it. They draw you in a little extra, and then they knife him off, of course. But even he doesn't do too many POVs. Like there's a lot of characters that are fairly well developed and still remain flat, in the sense that you never see inside their heads. But yeah, I guess that's just other ways to do that. So how, without a POV, then how do you develop how do you develop that character? So I don't know. Are you familiar enough with Dune that we can use that? I was just thinking of examples that we can kind of pull out, or we can go with something.
Probably not. Honestly, I read Dune and I did not love Dune. I know everybody else did. I read it in high school.
It's the desert. Is it the desert or is it the politics? Like I feel like most people dislike one or the other if they're going to dislike it.
I didn't dislike it. That I don't think it would be fair to say I disliked it. I enjoyed it when I read it, but it was definitely. So this is actually I had a conversation with a client about this the other day when we were talking about ideal reader. There are books that if it's a well-written book, but you're not the target audience, you're going to read it and you're going to go, oh, that was good. And you're going to put it down and you're not going to re-engage with the content. And I think that was the issue for me with Dune. And I haven't done an analysis to figure out like who is the ideal reader and why is that not me? But like I read it and I was like, and it wasn't forced upon me. Like I chose to read Dune in high school and I enjoyed it. And then I closed it and I finished it and I was done, as opposed to like Ender's Game, which I read and then I read it again and then I read it again and then I read it again and I read the whole series. And I think I've read Ender's Game like 11 times, so why, like two different sci-fi books, that were kind of popular around the same time. But one of them, like, I don't know, like I said, I would have to figure out, but I am certain it is a target audience issue. There was nothing, like I said, I didn't dislike it. I just finished it and I was like, okay, that was good. And I moved on.
That's how I feel about Jane Austen. I'm totally sympathetic. Pride and Prejudice, same way. Like I can appreciate that you're an amazing world builder and that you really pulled me into your, like, wow, that's an awesome one. I'll probably never pick that up again. Right? It's just it's not the target audience. But let's use Ender Game then. That's a good one. I've read Ender's Game a bunch of times too. Obviously, the kind of year by year classroom flow gives you the opportunity to kind of bring in and then flush back out characters with some regularity and also some kind of, mechanism that makes it make sense, right? You don't have to just kill them all every time. You can actually, I don't know, this kind of logically progresses. But I don't know, who's your favorite supporting character there? And how do you think he develops them? Orson Scott Card? How does he develop them, kind of make that work for you?
I mean, he develops, he pulls out different facets, right? Of like foils and mirrors for Ender, which is, those are your typical things that you're going to pull up, right? So
you want to spell that a little bit? Foils and mirrors.
So a mirror is somebody who reflects the protagonist. Typically, you don't want a full mirror. You want somebody who is a partial mirror. So, and that's what I talked about, pulling out aspects of the protagonist. So, I'm going to embarrass myself and not be able to remember anybody's names. But like when he builds out his team, once he becomes a commander.
Yeah, like Bean. Like Bean, like the little guy, Bean. Right. Like he never really has any hard like friction with Bean. He's not like an antagonist. He doesn't come in hot and heavy, but at the same time, you can tell he's kind of just a lesser version of Ender in a lot of ways, right?
100%. And so Bean is a perfect example of a mirror because he's the little scrawny underdog who kind of gets picked on, and Ender comes in to mentor him and kind of be his friend. And then you have some of the you have Stilson at the beginning, and then you have the kid from the showers.
How about Maldonado, the kid, the Spanish guy that he has enormous friction with at first, right? I mean, it's like second or third year they get in a fight. The guy's clearly a bully, but then they come around, right? Like he learns enough about Ender to feel like he's a good character. But how does he? I mean, what are the development tools that he uses to do that? Like, those characters seem flat to me. So how does he? What's that balance between like overdeveloping the character that we talked about earlier and kind of hitting it where they're doing just what you want them to do?
Well, I mean, I would argue that none of the supporting characters are super important in Ender's Game, right? Like the focus stays really tightly on Ender, and you do have these people who represent aspects, because the whole thing with Ender is that he's vicious enough and compassionate enough. And it's very, Orson Scott Card does not try to hide the ball at all. You've got older brother Peter, who is just a sociopath. And then you have Valentine, who's just, very aptly named soft-hearted, person who's just overflowing with compassion. And then you have Ender, who is that balance of, I'm going to beat Stilson to death when he jumps me, not because I enjoy or relish his suffering, but because I am going to win this fight and all the fights that come after. So you have
more fights, right? I'm going to win this fight so that there'll be no more fights.
Right. Exactly. And so you have the people, you have Maldonado who comes in and, they have it out, and he tempers, right? So we see that these aggressive urges can be tempered. And then we have people who are softer and more gentle, but their function isn't to be developed. Their function is to develop Ender, right? As Ender interacts with them, he becomes a more complex character, and we understand more and more pieces of him and what he values and who he is. So, if you're kind of counter argument that there is these characters are kind of flat, like for example, you could kill somebody off and I wouldn't care. Right. And I want the reader to care. The way that you do that is you make the protagonist care, because the protagonist is the avatar for the reader. So actually just had a conversation with a client about this on Saturday, where she's, kind of talking about the pacing of her book and when somebody's going to die and how all this is going to happen. And I said, here's the deal. If it's a random person who dies at the beginning of the book, the reader won't care. But if it's the protagonist's husband, who she loves dearly, who dies at the beginning of the book, the reader will be heartbroken with her, because you're going to show us how heartbroken she is. And we don't need to have gotten to know the husband before he dies to feel that heartbreak, because anybody who's ever been in a romantic relationship and had somebody that they love like that would understand how devastating it would be to in a violent, abrupt, unexpected way, lose that person, So you don't need to establish those things. It's already kind of baked into the cake. The reader has schema for that in place. We understand. And so you show the suffering and the heartbreak. But if you are trying to develop that relationship throughout, so totally different example, but super popular currently, the Fourth Wing series, which is a romantasy, not your jam. But
it's amazing.
Randy read it because it was, we had for training, we had to read it. I said we had to. I very much enjoyed reading it, but he suffered through it. And he was like, all the dragons and stuff are great, but like, why is she like talking about how hot he is every page? And I was like, because it's romantic fantasy.
It's the genre. It's right there in the title. It's right there in the genre.
Right. But so spoiler alert for those who haven't read it coming. Liam is a beloved character who gets killed at the end of the first book. And there's like, the internet is awash with memes about just the devastation of Liam's death. And so how did the author do that? How did she make everybody love him so much? She made him lovable, right? So the main character is in a war college for dragon riders. And her mother is the commandant of the war college. And everybody, so you already know, like everybody hates her guts because you're a Nepo baby and you don't deserve to be here. And we worked hard and you just got a spot because your mama gave you one, kind of a thing. And they just despise her.
Let me guess, she has a difficult relationship with her mother and none of this is actually handed at all. And she's probably the hardest on her of anyone. Is that where we're going?
Of course. Sure. And actually she didn't want to be a dragon rider. She had studied to go to the scribe quadrant to be a historian. And her mother like forced her to. So she did get the spot without having earned it. But she didn't want it. She very much wanted to go read books in the archives.
Good mother-daughter friction, right? Can't have a good target audience of women without some mommy toddy. Like
for sure,
the friction is real.
But anyway, so everyone is really shitty to her. Sorry, bad words. Everyone's terrible to her in this book. They're all literally out to get her. Like there are multiple murder attempts on her because that's one of the things. You're not allowed to kill anybody in your squad. But other than that, you're not allowed to kill anybody in your squad, and you're not allowed to kill anybody in the presence of leadership. But like sneak into their bed, kill them at night, poison them, whatever, like that's all fair game. And they have personal combat, like they go to the mat room. And if you kill somebody on the mats in a sparring round, that's also allowed. So multiple attempts on her life. Everybody's trying to kill her. Liam gets paired up with her and he is just nice. Like he's just nice to her. Like he does nothing over the top. It's just normal courtesy. And
he's just a human. He's just not a dick like everybody else in the book.
Exactly. He's just not a dick. That's literally, I mean, he doesn't do anything crazy over the top. He just isn't a dick. And when you contrast that with how awful everyone else is to her all the time, he seems like just this shining light of kindness and compassion. And then he actually does save her life later on in the book and one of the many murder attempts that are made against her. And so in the end, when he dies because they're in an actual battle and someone's coming at her on her blind side and he dives in and intervenes and gets killed in the process. And so you're just like, oh, like the one person who's nice to her is dead. And it's terrible.
And he was smoking hot, which was described many times, right? Like, oh no, not only that, but he was also ruggedly handsome.
I mean, of course. I mean, it's romantic.
No, that's awesome though. Yeah. But that's what we're talking about, right? You show reflected in the narrator in her scenes of like, I can't believe this person's nice to me. And then the next chapter, you're like, oh wow, everything in my life sucks, but this one person is keeping me going because he's just not a horrible human and everybody else is, and I got nothing to live for, but this person's here. And so you can kind of draw the reader along that path to where they really feel the same, like, man, that's a great person over there. That just think of all the wonderful things we could think about that person because of the way they're helping our poor protagonist who's quite put upon just make do. And that's awesome, right? I mean, so so I guess go back to Ender's Game, that we would say that Card does that, but then it gets cut so often that you kind of lose focus on that person. So we develop, like, okay, next year we lose sight on what that person looked like. He skips a grade, kind of, we do that again.
Mhm.
And then in the end, we have this kind of reunion tour of like, now when these characters are getting killed off, when you have this kind of heroic scene at the end where he's got to basically kind of use and wield his friends in a way that is, it's still enough development has been done that you as the reader can feel his kind of pangs of guilt from sending his friends in to die. And so I guess that makes sense. He did it sequentially. Some books would do it more all at the same time where, hey, okay, like again, Lord of the Rings, like, okay, well, we got them all in the story at the same time. So we're going to build them all roughly in the same, arc. But, Ender's Game, he does it compartmentalizedly. And it sounds like Fourth Wing is the opposite, right? We're like, okay, well, we only got one person. And so by developing that one person, you really get a ton of engagement from the audience.
Well, and she really develops a lot. That's part of the reason the book is so good, is because it's high fantasy. Rosa Rantasy is high fantasy, so there are dragons and castles and all of the things. But these books are like 600-800 page books, right? So there's a lot of characters who are really well developed. But he's an example of like a super beloved. Whereas in Ender's Game, the characters are really all tools that serve a plot function. But I don't think that was unintentional. I feel like that was deliberate because Ender himself is a tool in the story.
Yeah, that's right. And he has to work with tools, and they are specifically like by the end of every series or scene, you get kind of the idea that he's viewing this person as a tool. He loves this person. He does develop a relationship with him, but in the end, he can't escape that aspect of his brain that puts everything into this game theory, like win, lose, here's what we do to achieve it. Even when other people are more normal, like even when the other characters are like, well, this is actually a more normal human than Ender is. And he's or she seems like a reasonable person, but Ender's that much better because he is not a reasonable person. He's kind of like mechanical, I guess. Yeah. He's not quite sociopathic, but he's close, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, right? Is he's that balance of like compartmentalized and detached enough to do what needs to be done, but also compassionate enough not to become a megalomaniac and destroy the world with his power. And you see that even in the pieces at the beginning of each chapter with Colonel Graff and whoever talking, but you don't know who it is in the beginning that's talking, but they're always talking about him. And even that reinforces the idea that he's a weapon that's being honed. He's a tool that's being forged for a purpose. And he's taken as a 6-year-old and molded in this way. And that's how he is treated. And that's how he relates to others. And so, like I said, I don't think that was like a flaw in the writing. I think that was a feature.
No, I think you're right. I mean, because in a way, the author is doing what those characters in the book are doing. Like, I'm going to deliberately introduce this person in order to achieve this effect on Ender. So we're going to skip him up to this grade. I mean, in story, they're doing the same thing. We're going to put him here so that he's forced to deal with this challenge because we think it'll, hone this aspect of his personality that will make him this much better till we get to our end game. But now that makes sense. But there's one character we haven't talked about yet in that book that actually, to me, represents like another way to develop a character all the way, which is, I think, interesting to talk about. But like, Mazer Rackham, like does he end up being the father figure? Is he sort of this heroic, distant father figure who then becomes a father figure in the end? Does he like they develop the character? You never meet him through the book, right? You don't hear anything about him. And in the end, you meet him though he's fully developed, and kind of the character you've walked into. And so how does the author do that? And when is that a useful tool to like, well, we're going to develop a character, but never have the character even been in the book. You're going to hear about him in echoes, and all of a sudden, holy shit, you're meeting this character. You're like, wow, this is a substantial event. Like, even as a reader, I feel like, whoa, we've stepped into a piece of history. And when is that useful, and why? And I guess, how do you do that right?
I mean, I think that in the case of Ender's Game, he was very much a larger than life kind of figure.
Almost comic booky through the whole book.
Yeah. And meeting him at the end was an important piece of like, this is real, if that makes sense. Like,
it does.
Because everything that they were doing, the war they're fighting and the training, there's almost this feeling of like, how much of this is real? Because the enemy's never on the page. The enemy that Ender is fighting are the other kids, and to some extent the teachers, and that sort of thing, but not an actual enemy. And you have this almost like godlike figure in the book who is just put up on this pedestal and is so admired, and he's this crazy hero that saved the world. And then he comes in and he's on the page there and he brings it all down to reality. I think when he's
makes it dirtier again. Like, so, but so I don't remember. I read it so long ago. I read it when I was a little kid that I don't remember if during the final battle scene, I knew that he was fighting real opponents, or if it was just the final. I thought it was the final test in the game. Obviously, Ender does not. Ender is told that this is one more test and it's the final test. It's been a minute, but I don't believe he concludes that it was real until after the thing is over. Or maybe toward the end. Is it right before like the final thing when he kind of realizes? But I, as a reader, did not, I think, realize that. I thought, okay, one more test. Here we go. There's more to this book. And then you find out, oh, actually, you just destroyed a whole species. You're like, wait, what? Like, obviously, Ender has to come to terms with that too. But one, that was a really cool, like, Fight Clubby, like, again, like Chuck Palahniuk, like pull the rug out from under you as the reader. Great job there. Because like you said, the enemy through the entire book is just like, there's comic book bad guys. We're training against these guys. They're not real. The kids are the problem. And then you get to the end, you're like, oh, we won the war. You're like, whoa, shit. So good on him for doing that. But yeah, I guess Rackham, it's been long enough that I don't remember specifically. He doesn't introduce himself and say, we're going to fight the war now, right? That's still held off till after the whole thing's over.
Yeah, no, they don't tell him. It's all exams. I mean, they're the whole time they're at command school, they're actually fighting the war. The entire time. And you can see he seeds that really well, so that once you get the reveal, you can go back and you can be like, oh, because the further they get in command school, the older the technology, the older the ships that they're working with. It's like, yeah, because those are the first ones that were sent out. And so they're the ones that have made it the furthest. And so you start off, with these outer ones, and then you're working your way in. And then of course, you get to the battle at the home planet, and you have the oldest ships with the oldest technology, and Ender's like, they're just screwing me, and he's so mad. And I did not pick up on the reveal at the time. I also read it when I was 14. So for the first time.
Did not pick that up at all.
I don't know, as an adult, like at this point, I read an embarrassing number of books every year, and I read a ton of, action and thriller and things like that. So
that's embarrassing. That's not embarrassing to read too much.
Yeah, I mean, no, actually the part that is embarrassing is I have really bad ADHD. I feel like I've been focused really well on this conversation, though. I'm really proud of myself today. And so awesome. I'm frequently like, I think last time I looked, I met a mom at gymnastics a couple weeks ago who was like, oh, we should be friends on this, reading social media app. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And so we did. And she was like, you're reading 19 books right now? And I was like, yeah. She was just kind of appalled. So maybe it's not the number of books I read. It's the number I read at any given time.
Simultaneous. Well, see, now you just revealed as a reader, you've just given more challenge to an author. Like, okay, so not only do I have to compete for the reader's attention and ability to process the characters in my own book, but if she's also going to be reading 18 other books at the same time, like, well, shit, I better keep it real simple, right? Otherwise, there's no chance this person's going to remember anything about the story.
Don't make me work too hard. Yeah. No. And I will say that is one of my number one. I very rarely spend money on books. Like, I have to be very invested. So I do Kindle Unlimited, which is a subscription service. So I can check out books from that. I check out books from the library. I have our library has an app where you can download Kindle books through the library and check them out that way. So it's very rare that I pay actual money for books. And because of that, I will quit a book. Like and it's part of my job, right? Like, I get paid to read books that are not always their best and need work, and can be kind of a slog to get through sometimes, because that's my job and I love my job and I'm here for it. But also, if I am reading in my free time, you need to entertain me. If you make me work, I'm going to close your book and walk away.
I mean, that's a lot of pressure though, but that gets into a whole nother aspect of writing. We could probably talk about another time, which is like the hook, right? Like, you got to pull the reader in quick. Like, again, one of my favorites on this is, Jurassic Park. Like, I love the little prologue that Crichton writes. And again, it's been a while since I picked the book up, but you basically are like, mysterious box. guys down in this Central American country, like prodding, like, what the hell is in this box? People die, and then it just vanishes, and you skip to these other like kids and characters. You're like, what the hell's going on? I mean, you see the cover of the book, you have some idea what's going on there, but at the same time, it pulls you in quickly. You're like, whoa, what do we got going here? And that's fascinating, a fascinating topic all into itself. Is how do you grasp the reader? How do you get them to not turn the book back to Kindle Unlimited?
Right.
It's
hook
funny.
is one of my very favorite topics, and I won't let us get derailed, but like, you know, you have to hook them at the beginning, but you have to keep hooking, like you keep opening loops, and you have to keep opening loops, and you have to close them, which is a whole nother, you know, but you have to hook them over and over and over.
No hanging chats. You can't just like hanging chat it. So actually we got a couple of comments.
You can some, right? Because some of them you're going to open at least one loop at the beginning of the book that you're not going to close till the end, because that's the global plot of the story. But if, you know, I was working with a client last week on a scene, and I was like, hey, I went through and I was like, you opened 17 loops in this chapter and you closed 3. And I need you to close way more than that, because I have just hit the point by the end of the scene where I'm just confused because I don't know what's happening. And I was like, that's not, you open a loop and then you close it, and then you open another one and you close it. And you can leave some open because that's what keeps you reading. Somebody commented the other day about like Leanne Moriarty, how he loves her books because she'll open a loop and just leave it there. And you're like, you know, a letter comes and you put it down on the counter and then go through all this other stuff. And the reader's like, what's in the letter? Open the freaking letter. Like, I need to see the letter, you know, and that's what keeps you turning the page.
But with some authors, that's like a shtick, right? There's some authors whose books I pick up knowing that you're going to drag me along. There's going to be some weird stuff up front that I'm not going to get. You'll probably close it out in the end. Maybe a little bit you won't, but you're going to kind of dangle me along. And that they do it well enough that that's part of the fun, is knowing that these loops are going to kind of just hang suspensefully through this whole thing, or I won't even recognize the loops. You're like, oh, like what you talked about with Ender's Game, where you're like, I didn't even see what you were talking about until the very end of the book. And wow, let's go back and kind of review it. Right. Some people could do that really well. We had a few comments. So we got we've got talking forward about Ender's Game, how in the sequel he actually saves the species he destroyed in the first. I mean, to me, that's a discussion about like arcs within arcs. Like, so the book that I wrote last time, I decided to turn it into a trilogy because I figured there was a story before and a story after. But the trick in doing that is you have to then zoom out from the character. Like in this case with Ender, you have to zoom out from the character and say, okay, well, that entire arc is now resolved. So if I want to keep this character fresh and interesting, I need to make sure that I either introduce a new challenge or kind of reflect back on the old challenge in a new light, which I think is kind of what the sequel book was about. Is like, no, yeah, there's misfit broken toy, you killed everybody. What do you do now? Which is super challenging. And then the second comment was, hey, they said they saw Ender's Game, they saw it in 3D, and then, you know, got the Sting-O-Vision effect of a bunch of ants stinging them during it, which I gotta think,
as you're
working through the climax. Yeah, it sounds, where the hell is this movie theater? Like, is this like is this a little Central America? Is this where are we talking about that we got stung at the theater? But
yeah, no, thank you on that. I love Speaker for the Dead, the sequel, and I read the 4 books, and then I think another one came out after that I still have not read, but all the way through Children of the Mind, like I thought it was really, really good. I did not watch the movie ever because I heard it was terrible, and nothing upsets me more than watching my favorite books be destroyed. So.
You don't like Stephen King books then? You don't like Stephen King movies, right? So we're definitely like the worst. Does he have the worst set of adaptations of book to movie? Is there somebody who has worse? I don't know.
I still fully maintain that one of like my favorite high school book, which I've tried to go back and read it since then, and it's such angsty trash. I hate it now, but I loved it in high school. And it was a typical, like, you know, love story with the love triangle and the angsty teenage girl, which I totally related to when I was 15.
Is it Twilight? What are we talking about here?
What was it? Twilight. Unfortunately, I am too old to have Twilight come out when I was in high school. But no, it's called Blood and Chocolate. Don't recommend it unless you're an angsty teenage girl. But werewolves and, you know, like I said, this whole love triangle thing. And I loved the book. My friends all loved the book. We all read it a whole bunch of times. It was amazing. My senior year of high school, a movie came out from it. And again, it's got a love triangle. And in the movie, she ends up with the other guy.
Whoa.
And I was so
That's a bold
mad.
move. That's a bold move.
Twilight series, and she ends up with Jacob in the end. I was like, no, what? No. I was so angry. And then, yeah, by the time Ender's Game came out as a movie, I was like, nope, I don't trust you people anymore. You cannot have my childhood favorites.
I will watch no made for TVs, like, or no adaptation of book. Like, there's no we're not going to see them at all.
I mean, I watched the Harry Potters, and
they were good.
That's pretty much it. Yeah, I enjoyed the Harry Potters. I do enjoy the Harry Potter movies. And especially, I feel like I'm more forgiving with Harry Potter because especially later in the series, the books are so massive. I wish that they were made today when everything is an 8-part Amazon series, you know? Sure. And so instead of 2 or 3 hours, you get 8 hours plus to go through it. That would have been nice. But I can be forgiving when it's long, you know? And
well, so but sometimes you know it when you see it, right? There's series that just do it right. And they kind of hit the length to quality ratio. I mean, I would, you know, if we looked at the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, I would say that I had some issue with the Lord of the Rings for, like, you know, character adaptation and changing pieces of the story and cutting stuff out. But the Hobbit's the opposite. Where you're like, you took a 200-page book and you made it 9 hours. Right. And I feel like you really had to make a lot of shit up to fill that space. Yeah. And they did. They just made up all kinds of crazy shit. You're like, you didn't do it well. Right. I mean, there's some you do well, some you don't. And I mean, I'm sure that's a challenge, right? I don't want to pretend that I can make books into screenplays. Of course, The Princess Bride would be the example of, you know, movie that's just, I think, better than the book. I mean, I like the book okay, but the movie's obviously legendary. So it's hard to, some people, I guess they do it so well, it's even better.
I mean, I hate to speak blasphemy, but I feel the same way about Pride and Prejudice. Like, you know.
Which one? Do you like the movie better or the book?
The movie. Like, I feel like, especially the Keira Knightley version of the movie, because you've got the BBC adaptation, which is so long, and then the Keira Knightley version, which cuts a lot out. And I'm like, honestly, you hit all the high points of the story, you know?
Well, so Austen, I think, to me, is kind of like Dickens, and that, again, paid by the word, unsure with Austen. We know that Dickens was. Holy hell, do you have to be quite so descriptive? I mean, being descriptive is great. You want to immerse me in the story, but geez, like, if your sentence has 7 clauses and they're all passive voice, like, I'm not sure what we're still talking about. And I also don't know why we spent so much time talking about what the person was wearing at dinner. But the movie can capture all that magically in a scene in a way that a book apparently has to, like, struggle through like 4 or 5 pages to do. So, like, I know Jane Austen, great. I mean, again, good world builder, but holy crap, a little wordy for my taste personally. Mm-hmm. Now, did you read the version with zombies?
I did. Yes, I read Pride and Prejudice with Zombies, and I watched the movie. Yes.
I gotta say, to its credit, I went into it so my daughter challenged me to read Pride and Prejudice. It's like, I will, for you. And then she got me that one. She's like, maybe you'll like this one better. I was surprised at how well the author mirrored the style of the original book and did not really diverge from it, like, to the point of, like, holy, you went 5 pages deep into your dinner description too, and then zombies. So it was kind of entertaining how they did it, but that's different story or discussion altogether.
No, that one was very entertaining. Even, like, I can never get over the detail of her, like, tying up her dress before she does her upside down, you know, stuff, because they would be modest.
We have to be modest. Absolutely. Okay, so in the chat we've got that Stephen King wrote Shawshank Redemption, and you're 100%. Anybody that wants the counterpoint of Stephen King books make crappy movies, you've got Shawshank to fall back on. I don't deny that. All I'm going to throw is to say Maximum Overdrive, It from the 1980s. Like, there's so many examples of, like,
also Shawshank is a short story. It's like 88 pages. Like, it's hard to screw up something that, again, The Hobbit turned into 9 hours, you know? Like, when you take something short and make it something short, it's fine.
You're right. And I got to grant, yes, Shawshank is great. Although maybe if you paid more money for writers and quality actors, you would have similar experience with your other, you know, adaptations. I don't know. I'm not an expert in that side of the field. But we're actually getting close to the end today, Laura. Is there we got about a minute left. Is there anything you want to say and wrap up? I think it was pretty good session today.
I would like to say that I said my ADHD kept me on track, and then I took us on a goose chase. So it's a fail. That's all right. I've
done 0 podcasts in which we didn't go on 1,000 tangents. And you know what? In the world of 2025, where we all have scattered attention, and I think that's just the way it is. We don't have any plot arcs anymore. We don't live in, like, coherent storylines. We just we lived in a collection of scenes that are mostly unrelated. I think that's just business as usual.
We're in the age of the mini
Well,
plot.
oh my gosh, it's just painful how little. So it's like, sorry, last point here. We've been reading letters from 2003 in support of this new manuscript. My wife and I have been reading all the letters we wrote to each other back in 2003 because there was no email where it was. We just had to write letters. And occasionally she'd print out an article like on a printer and mail it to me. And you would see like what these people were writing for just the Wall Street Journal or Glamour or whatever it was she printed out. The quality of writing in the average media production from 2025 to 2003 has dropped by like 9 grade levels. I don't know what happened. I don't know when we decided that people no longer capable of reading like complete sentences with, multi-syllable words, but wow, it's really eye-opening.
Yeah.
Kind of sad. But on that low note, I guess let's wrap up the show today. Thanks for your time, Laura. Appreciate the commentary, and it's super insightful. I didn't know half of the stuff you were talking about the why characters develop the way they are. Super educational for me. So hopefully our audience got a little bit out of it too. Hope you have a great week. Hope fall treats you well. Of course. We'll talk to you next time.